Yeah.
Oh shit. Yeah.
Oh, gee, what's your team name again?
Bonaparte.
Bonaparte A. OO is Team Ravenclaw. CG. What's CG? What's team name? CG. Oh no, so long. All your ex.
Oh, in 2020, congratulations to all teams for making it this far. Spiritual gangsters. Hi, you're there. So speaking artists, please tell me who's speaking first and second. Tell me for tenor programs if you want to. Bonaparte A, who's speaking first?
Michiel, Ethan, and Joseph.
Thank you. Open opposition to Ravenclaw. What's the first sentence on this? The first manual. This final is being streamed. If you, for whatever reason, don't wish to be streamed, please also at the beginning of the stream, so make sure that you turn them off. I see that also doesn't want to be streamed, so maybe.
Which
Sorry.
Hello.
Is it being streamed and then recorded to the YouTube or?
so it's being streamed and then we are also to figure out.
Okay, cool. I'll decide later. I can consent with that.
So if at any other moment you want to change your mind, for whatever reason, you don't need to tell us why, just are there any further questions before we start now? Apart from where the PowerPoint presentation is now. For motion this house supports nationalism, we'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to open the debate in the stands. Here.
Yes.
Oh, there's no beamer. It shows all kinds of flags. It's very nice and colorful. Ah, all right. Okay, it's not going to work. All right. That makes sense. Okay, so let me just turn on my clock. Thank you, panel. Today we live in a terrible experiment. We live in an experiment where the idea of there being nations, the idea of there being set groups of people who can work together to do something is being undermined by the ideology of globalism and globalized hyper-capitalism. We think this is a terrible, terrible problem, and that is why we believe that nationalism and nation states have a place in this world today. I'm going to bring you three very simple things. I'm going to make the most classic case possible. I'm going to explain the problem of global capitalism. I'm going to explain the solution of nationalism, and especially economic nationalism, and I'm going to explain to you the results of why this leads to some nationalist identity building as a necessity, as a prerequisite for the good things that are part of our solution. So, first of all, what is the problem of globalism? So basically, what happens when you put everybody together in the same giant group? It means that everybody is put up for exploitation. It becomes a race to the bottom of all against all. And there are actors who are very much in position to take advantage of this. These actors are called multinational global corporations. They love it when they can exploit the labor of poor people in developing nations for the lowest possible cost and sell that at a gigantic markup in Western countries. And they also love it when those Western countries are able to afford their products, but not able to actually afford meaningful opposition to these exploitative economic practices across the world, which also leads to the impoverishment. No thanks. Where's the clarification? Okay, which also leads to the impoverishment of people in developed states. So that's the major problem that we face. Moreover, there are structures in place, both in developing countries and developed countries, structures that ensure the life quality and happiness of people all across the world, which can only be workable if there is a limited number of people in. And that's not because people are essentially different. It's because people come into different states that have different functions in a way that makes them more likely to use structures in a way that the structures can't afford. So, for instance, welfare only works in a limited case where not a whole bunch of people not have the skills to compete in that economy of the welfare state can come in because they will be forced to be on welfare because they can't compete in those states anyway. So you need borders for those things to work out. So this has to be countered. So this whole globalist thing that we saw has to be countered by building sturdy structures to improve life quality. I'm going to get into why this is necessary for both developed countries and also necessary for developing countries. So on to the solution. So the solution for developed countries are welfare states, because after all, we need to redistribute the gains of economic development as is placed by limited global capitalism, because we do actually agree that it's good to have an exchange of goods, an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of economic flows, so that we can all, find the way that in which we can best compete with one another, and in this way, eventually grow the global economic product. But we need that to be redistributed. And why is this nationalist? Why am I calling this nationalist? Because most people think of nationalism, they think of Hitler and Farage in a lesser sense. I'm not comparing Farage to Hitler, but it's still pretty bad stuff, which we also don't like. By the way, we don't like that. We're not defending that. You don't have to attack us on that. Why is this? Well, because giving money to a hospital in our developed countries or giving money to a school in our developed countries is an inherently nationalist thing to do, because it means we're not giving it to this imagined global community where we could also be spending that money. So this is actually a nationalist thing to do. So therefore, this idea that there are welfare states that redistribute the money that we all make in this global economy is actually a nationalist thing. Sure. Right, I will get to that point in my very last point, but thanks for bringing that up. It basically has to do with the fact that we as left-wingers have taken away from nationalism so much that we only leave it to the bad, evil farages of this world, which we do not want either, right? So, notice that it's broad. This welfare state is very broad. It applies to many things: schooling, healthcare, welfare distribution, that sort of thing. Secondly, it also works for developing countries, because they need to control, even if they can't afford welfare states yet, they need to control economic development. Read, for instance, Hadrian Strong's The Secret History of Capitalism, where he explains why it's so important that capitalist corporations from other countries can't just take away the wealth and productivity of developing nations in an exploitative sense, where everything that is produced in your country, everything of profit, is only siphoned away by multinational corporations into the hands of already existing wealthy states. We believe that it's the right of developed nations to say, no, look, you can invest this much in our country, you can take away this much in our country. This is going to be the standard of our currency exchange, and we're going to use all the money that we make as much as we can on the development of our own peoples. And that is extremely important, because otherwise it simply doesn't work. You can't forever stay, at the primary resource extraction and exploitation rate if you want to better the lives of your people. So why does this result in nationalism? Well, it's very important that people have a reason to work together, right? We can pretend that we are all one giant, but frankly, I don't care that much about people in Argentina compared to the people in my own country. Of course not, because I don't share the language, I don't share the same culture. And we can say, oh yeah, that's terrible, we should overcome this. We have been trying to overcome this and failing, because this is simply how people work. People can work based on things like language, things like united values. They can work on things that bind us together and make us believe that we are all in this together. And that's extremely important and extremely helpful. That is why, for instance, we can allow for sacrifices like high taxation, like, for instance, taking care of people who are weaker than us, or, for instance, accepting that other people, which we might not like, have different lifestyles. But we accept that because we are bound together in other ways. So these are very good things and results of nationalism. And therefore, we should also instill this idea that, there is a sort of national identity. It is surely an exclusionary or appropriating national identity where we go to other countries and tell them what to do. No, it's having your own things together. So why are they all right-wing? It's because we have not done this, and therefore we've left the door wide open to little mini Hitler's like Russia come in and like, hey, look, nationalism means that we should hate foreigners. That's not the case. It's just about doing things together.
Thank you, panel, and I'm very happy to stand here after 6 years to once again get my revenge for the lost final. So, okay. Opposition says it already. One of the worst things that can happen to you is that you have no nationality. Luckily, this is only about 0.1% or 0.2% of the world population, but then opening oppositions come with the solution. What if we make sure nobody has a nationality, then we'll make sure that's fair, right? It's also a typical Vader thing. It makes it worse for 99.8% of the world, but it's more fair. Now, what we're going to explain to you, fairness is a very abstract concept. We're just going to explain how this makes everything better, and we're going to engage directly with their case, and then I'm going to give a little bit more information about the development model. Because what they say, and notice that a lot of the speech was based on the phrase, we have seen in human history, nationalism, and then I just relate it to a lot of bad things, and then I say, we have seen this in human history. What we say is nationalism has a lot of different forms, right? In the 19th century, nationalism was exactly what opposition says it was, right? It says we are a nation, we are a certain people, and based on our ethnicity, we have certain innate characteristics that make sure that we are better than everyone else. But we say these kind of nationalisms morph, because we sort of figured out that this wasn't the kind of nationalism that was very nice. What we say in the 50s, for example, after World War II, most people realized, hey, the idea of being in constant competition with each other and considering your race as superior is not the model that we should go, but we do need an economic nationalism. We do need to make sure that the poor masses of Germany in the 30s and in other countries as well, because they realized that these countries could become fascist as well, they need something to cling to. You can't just say to them, if you lose out your system, fuck you. So what we say is, and that's what they said, is we need a nationalism, not an exclusionary nationalism or an inclusionary nationalism based on race, but an inclusionary nationalism based on your passport, right? We have also acted in accordance with these kind of principles in the past. For example, many of these states that were still very nationalist in the 70s considered in their own interest to get immigrants to these kind of countries. We have seen it in the Netherlands. We've seen this has led to a lot of conflict within these states, but we say the identity of being a Dutchman does extend to being from Suriname. It does extend to being from Morocco. When it stops the opportunity from being extended to this is the moment that you say, hey, we reject nationalism altogether. You are not in this together, but we are going to say everyone in the world that is not living in the Netherlands is actually also entitled to the things that you have. And this is what makes these people so insecure. And then he says, oh yeah, we can have left-wing policies without being nationalist. Well, then explain to me what, for example, in Dutch we have the welfare system, right? We give €1,000 to everyone in the Netherlands that doesn't want to work. They have to do some stuff, but basically we give them €1,000 a month. That's €13,000 a year. You can build a lot of schools, well, not a lot of schools, but you can do some pretty good stuff with €13,000 in Angola, right? We say it's inherently nationalist to say this money is for these people. Some of these people don't even want to work, they're just useless people, but we say just on the basis of being a Dutchman, being a part of our community entitles you to this, right? And this is what gives people the security in order to go on with their lives. And it is inherently nationalist to say we are going to give the money to you and not to somewhere else where we might spend it more efficiently, but it would not be a nationalist way of spending it, right? And then they say, so because this is inherent to Farage, once again, we have seen in human history, Farage is like the 19th century. We say Farage and the backlash that we see in the right wing is exactly because the left wing has decided to leave nationalism, to say we are in a global community and our prime responsibility is not to the people within our own country, our responsibility is to the global community. This is what makes people go to Farage. Because figure this, the people in the north of the Netherlands, of England, where the mining areas that were completely screwed over by Thatcher, these are not people that think, hey, I think that voting very right-winger for Boris Johnson and his international capitalist friends in the city, they are going to help my situation. But they are so afraid of the left wing in Great Britain that they will actually not act in their own interest because they consider the actual international community much more important than their own community, that they are willing to vote extremely right-wing just to get the nationalism. What we say, we have a good way in order to stimulate these people to vote left-wing and to have a healthy nationalism in their way, right? Why is nationalism healthy for everyone? This is because the development within a nation and without a nation, both inside and outside the nation, is contingent on these kind of nationalism. For example, what is very clear in almost every global economy is that there is a core and there is a periphery within a certain economy. What does this mean? This means that in the core, for example, in Sweden, we are very much in the core. There's high quality of institutions. There's lots of stuff that can be done here, lots of money to be made. This relies, however, on a periphery where the goods are being transported from towards Sweden, right? What we say is the moment that you say we leave it to the global community, this will simply reinforce the status quo that we already have, where the periphery of the world supplies to the core. And the interesting thing, because of returns to scale and other benefits, yes.
Under nationalism, excess resources in Sweden will remain in Sweden. Do you believe the global core will choose to deny any law of foreign aid in the interest of protectionism?
If it is in the interest of Sweden in order to sell the excess resources over here, we think a nationalist Sweden would simply do so. It's not everything stays here. We say we use the resources that would be beneficial for Sweden, and luckily trade is beneficial for a lot of people, right? But what we see, there are inherent returns to scale. Being the core already makes you more likely to become the core in the future. Universities, the institutions, the knowledge, the people that can work for your company, the infrastructure, it's all already here. If you say in your developing nation, your only way to emancipation in order to become a periphery for this core, you will never become a core yourself. But if you say within our nation, we do not accept certain things, we have our own labor regulations, and you can't send stuff over here if you do not abide by our regulations, then developing countries become a core in and of themselves. They develop in their nation and they trade with other nations, and they develop as a core with a periphery within their nation. There will still be international trade, there will still be international community, but it will be based on principles whether it's beneficial for countries to do so. And frankly, we have saved left wing, the left wing, we have saved nationalism, vote Bernie Sanders. I thank you.
Oh.
Just a second. Got a lot of notes. I think an important base premise whenever you discuss any sort of cultural interaction, certainly international relations, is to remember that we are not the same across all parts of the world. We are also not rational actors, again, across all parts of the world. And both of those are okay, as long as you don't act as if they weren't true, which I think is what I would accuse somewhat of doing right now. But I'll get more into that after some fast and loose rebuttal. First of all, as I also asked Matty, okay, so you don't like nationalistic states. What is the alternative? Basically, same states, but they do less flag waving. Okay, and they do that. They're mad at the flag waving states because they employ their monopoly of violence very enthusiastically. First of all, that's pretty uncomparative to Marxist states. These are things that they seem to be keen of. Who also have a monopoly of violence, who also use quite a lot of cops. It's not like there's any correlation between the amount of policemen you have and how nationalist the culture in the country is. So I don't really see how their solution brings us any closer to doing away with this evil monopoly of violence. Then they say, oh, but here they talk to my rationality thing I just said. They say that nations are a bad parameter to provide royalties on because they're arbitrary. Sure, they're arbitrary. Let's be frank, that's true. But arbitrary doesn't equate meaningless. Like, if I have a child, if I have this particular child is me or is mine and became mine, it's partially arbitrary. There's always a level of randomness when you combine the genetic code of the parents and whatever. But that doesn't mean that the relation I have to that child is meaningless. So this establishment from arbitrary to meaningless, they asserted. I don't think they did enough to defend it, and I don't think really it stands. Then they talk about, the world got better as we got less nationalistic. Correction. The world as a whole, chiefly outside of the West, got a whole lot better. But China is not exactly a nationalist place, even though they've been driving most of this reduction in poverty. So again, I don't think on the states who have the ideology that they like doesn't support their case, because you can be Marxist, it'll be hugely nationalistic. And these also China, sort of doing all these things, they still did some pretty bad shit. Like, it should, what the Kurds had happened to them wasn't fair. But very similar things happen to Crimeans in Soviet Union, is happening to Uyghurs in China right now. So I don't think this assertion of that Marxism or class solidarity or whatever is really in practice a better solution is really fair. I think it's very ahistorical. Now let me get into my constructive. There's 4 points. What is healthy competition? What is good diversity between nations? Why do we share experiences to have a true democracy? And why is there no normal, and why does nationalism help us realize that? Let me get into healthy competition. I hinted at this PY. Basically, it's true, nationalism does in some sense pit nations in. Again, let's be fair and see that. The reason, and then Meister says, and then you should look at historical data and say that when you pit countries against each other, they eventually start fighting. That was historically true. But we only have to engage with this mean if we can't prove that things haven't fundamentally shifted for most of human history, which it very clearly has. There's two main reasons why outright war between nations is much less likely today. One, you have a mutually assured destruction between nuclear states. Like, no one is going to fire a missile at the guy who fire another missile back and blow up the entire country. Two, we have an actual international society now, so that even if smaller, less threatening states going into bad stuff, the international society will actually try and intervene. Is it 100% effective? No, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we had before. So we don't think that we really have to engage with the rest of history, even though that might have been true before. Then let's talk about what is a good example of healthy competition. Let's take space race. The space race, by some of you in the US, wasn't actually that much motivated by the invention of humankind. It was motivated by the US sticking to the Soviets and vice versa. But as a byproduct of that, we have huge scientific advances, and scientific advances in a way that was risky, that was uncertain in its payoff. Basically, the kind of things that a rational wouldn't do. But luckily, currently we're not rational, so we need a cultural system that taps into that irrationality. I was up saying, hey, you guys need to score more points than you should take some risks to try to address that. Then you get these great scientific progress as a result of it. It then eventually later returns to stable states of, the International Space Station and that. But the big upfront investment, which we had no idea of knowing what it would actually pay off, luckily it did, came from nationalism, from the irrational spark of nationalism. That's a unique benefit of an irrational system, which nationalism is. We are stupid, irrational monkeys that have barely evolved from the Stone Age, and we should just align with that instead of trying to conjure up perfect systems. Let me talk about good diversity between nations. Basically, if all the nations have the same system and the same ideas, most of them are actually superfluous. Luckily, throughout a lot of history, that happens in the case. You have different systems and those different ideas arise from it. Then you can contribute more to the shared knowledge of humankind. Yoga probably didn't arise anywhere but the university model that we have in most of the world today, most in Greece. Supply chain management, my field, to make sure that you all have all your Amazon shit and all your cheap crap, and then you can get it from anywhere in the world in a few days. Rose in Japan would never have arisen in another system because Japan is much more deliberative approach to economic system. That's also why standardizing economic systems would seem to be what all wants is a bad idea because now we're getting contributes to worse ideas. Everyone has the same background, everyone has the same ideas, and we really don't need more than one person to come up with the ideas. Let's shared experiences. Why are shared experiences necessary for the fulfilling of truth democracy? Because the truth democratic ideal is that we are free and informed citizens making free and informed decisions after we sat down and discussed the other. But if the people have another opinion, have completely different some cultural references in their life, schooling, in what the holidays they celebrate, maybe there's nothing for you to relate to, you will be much worse able to engage with them. Like we have shared rituals in debating, which means that we can more effectively understand what we're doing to each other. And nationalism, again, it's arbitrary that you're in this particular state, but it's very meaningful because it means that you have a specific school system, specific national holidays, specific language, specific media references, which make you able to relate to the other side. And you can actually have this democratic ideal of deliberative discussion and finding compromise that works for everyone. You cannot have that if the person on the other side thinks that women are property or thinks that freedom of speech should apply in a different way. You have to have some level of shared culture to address this. I'm sorry I couldn't take a POI. I'm sure you'll do great. Yeah, competition is healthy, and we now have a much better infrastructure today for addressing it. Good diversity between nations is a thing, and we should all have shared experiences internally and vote. Sign up.
First, I will start with just a little bit of rebuttal to opposing governments or case about the fact that we need nationalism to have this competition, and you mentioned the space race. This competition can exist within just companies within the same country or different countries, so that doesn't really, it's not exclusive to their case. In terms of what opening government brought to us, the idea that this economic nationalism can exist without the fundamental belief that your country and its citizens are more important in every scenario than any other country and their systems is absolutely ridiculous and it's wrong. You have to have basic nationalism, the fundamental beliefs I've just described, to have the economic nationalism that they've discussed. And I'll explain to you why. You can't believe that an unemployed person in the Netherlands who refuses to work, although they have the capacity to, deserves 13,000 euros a year over children in Angola who don't have access to education. And that's because those children, due to the birth lottery, have ended up in a situation in which they have struggled in every aspect of life. Healthcare, whether it be education, every single aspect of life. But you think that a person who is comfortable in every other sense deserves that money more than those people. You have to believe in that case that your citizens are more important in every case scenario. So even in case of national disaster in other countries, you won't be willing to help. And in that case, we get a net overall harm. And so just to, so on our side, what we bring you is that we actually prefer other forms of identity that bring countries together. cultural identities, the identity of language and religion and so on, over the idea of this arbitrary thing that brings you together that is just being from the same nation. And why we think that is because these other means of tying people together, bringing people together, are not they don't exclude people. In fact, they actively include people. Most religions seek to bring people into the faith because they think it's the ultimate way to get to heaven, whatever it is. Most cultures will include people based on the language and the food which are shared over other nationalities, which are not just based on being between the four walls of this arbitrary border that's been drawn by whoever it is. We also think that the purpose of identity is to, ensure growth, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and you don't get that with nationalism because it's not based on any deep-rooted belief. It's not based on anything. The only thing that it's based on is that your citizens are more important in every case scenario, which changes all the time because apparently the definition of this is as long as you have the passport, that's what makes you a member of that nation. But that's not the case because the minute that you decide to believe, oh, you know what, this country has had a natural disaster, and so we should allow some of their citizens in. And you start to believe that you'll be excluded from this nationalism that exists in your country because now you're rooting for someone who's not part of that nation. So in that case, it excludes you whenever you choose to have a moral standpoint that alters from the idea of putting your country first, even in cases where it wouldn't cause significant harm or any harm to your country. In cases in which it's actually just extending your arm to help people who are in a stressful or a difficult situation. We also think that nationalism suppresses and oppresses people and the majority of people. And why we think that is even in the case, if we take OG at best case scenario, and that nationalism is based solely on possessing this piece of paper that's a passport that says you're from there, it prevents you from criticizing when your government does things like invade other countries or kill or start wars and so on. And why this is the case is, in the past, wars included having boots on the ground. Wars included soldiers dying. Now it's not the case. So when you're not causing a significant harm to your own country because your soldiers are not dying, your people are not dying, and it's just you're bombing these countries, you get a net benefit from that country by invading whatever its resources or whatever you get out of it, then you are no longer going to criticize your own country because you have this inherent and intrinsic belief that it's okay as long as your country benefits from it, even if you are causing significant harm to a large population of the world who are people who are vulnerable, who are people who just over history have constantly been oppressed.
Yes. Wouldn't it be nice as a developing country not to rely on foreign aid in case of a disaster because your country was actually developed because of economic nationalism?
See, that's a great idea. It's a great idea that we can all be nationalistic, all put our countries first, and that every single country will develop rapidly, and things are going to be great. But that's not the case because at the end of the day, nationalism is not just about the citizens of that country. A lot of these countries are poor not because the people in there don't have intrinsic wealth for their country and don't believe in economic nationalism, but it's because they're led by people who care more about their own self-interest than they do about the citizens of their country. And so the idea that all of a sudden, when they don't get foreign aid, when they don't get welcome from all these wealthy countries in the West, they'll all of a sudden choose to love their country is absolutely ridiculous because they would in this case if they wanted to. Thank you. We also think that it does a great deal to just erode democracy. And why we think this is the case is when you live in a country where everyone believes that your nation is the most important and it's the key thing, and then you go against it because you don't think what they're doing is right, you're less likely to go against them because you don't want to be excluded from being part of that nationalistic spirit. And the thing with nationalism is the thing with nationalism is it's a very narrow belief system. And why it's very narrow is when we compare it to other identities such as religion and culture and so on, people within those beliefs still have varying views on politics, on how they live their lives, on how they interpret those religions and cultures. But you don't get that in nationalism. Because the minute you start to believe, oh, maybe we should open up our borders, maybe we should have welfare aid and so on, you're immediately isolated from that group because they no longer see you as putting your country first and having them as a priority. In fact, they see you as being a traitor to the cause, and the cause being putting your country first and making it the most important thing. And so when you're living in a society where you're constantly fearing the fact that you might be removed from this group, the only group that you belong to now, because nationalism, doesn't allow for you to engage in all these other groups, because you can't involve in you can't be religious and nationalistic at the same time, because of the fact that nationalism supports the idea that nothing is more important than those people within the walls and constraints of the border. Nothing is more important. Whereas religion, so on, tells you to open and extend your arms to other countries and to help those less vulnerable. Less well off than you. And so we think that we think that on our side we just have a larger amount of people and we create less harm overall. That's why we.
Okay, so John, this is some nice flags.
Okay, dear panel. I'll start with some rebuttal of the cases of humanitarian aid and immigrants that we just heard, and then I'll move on to some primary clashes of the debate. So first of all, what we really get from CG is slightly not a lot of engagement. What we do get is this idea that, oh, without nationalism, we'll never have humanitarian aid, we'll never want help. We actually think that a lot, especially the successful national states, will make it part of their identity that, oh, we're so good and successful that we can give a bit to others. We think that we see this especially a lot in Scandinavia, where helping other countries has become part of the national identity. We don't think that this is completely gone on either side of the house. Furthermore, we also get this idea that we'll never have immigrants, or immigrants will be very, very persecuted. But as we've already stated, our definition includes just the position of a passport. And we think that we've seen tremendous strides in including people in the nation saying, yes, you can come here if you decide to be part of our nation. We will welcome you. We saw it with Jewish scientists after the Second World War being welcomed in America, becoming tremendously successful and hailed as heroes by everyone for aligning with the American identity, not because of their race. And we think that we see France doing exactly the same, so we can still have immigrants. The country simply chooses to do so. Now, furthermore, a big clash in this debate was on violence and how violent nationalism is. Now, we think we've quite clearly shown, especially Daniel, came with a lot of arguments for why most states will commit some violence. They all have the monopoly on violence, and most states will use this monopoly. Quite often, they will react to real political concerns and will try to strengthen their position against other countries. That's simply a fact we have to deal with. But we can make them less rational through nationalism. And yeah, furthermore, we have this idea that, oh, in bad times, we always end up with the extreme version, and somehow, without it being explained in any way, we're told that extreme nationalism is much worse than extreme Marxism. We don't think so. We think that most ideologies, whether it's liberalism becoming anarchism, or it's nationalism becoming national socialism, or it's Marxism becoming trying to take over the entire world, we think that all of these things are bad, so that is parallel on both sides of the house. Now, another clash is the big clash on whether nationalism is needed. What benefits do we get from nationalism? And then we get a lot of concerns over, well, maybe we don't need nationalism for wealth. Maybe economies can be built up in normal states without nationalist policies to create welfare systems and such. But crucially, we've shown you how cultural nationalism and competition between different countries leads them to take bigger risks, leads them to irrationally try to push forwards and push for the stars and do even better than they would have otherwise. Also, we contend that nationalism has to mean you're proud of your country, and it has to mean that you think that your country is in some way supreme over others, but it does not mean you have to think that on every case. You have to think that there is something wonderful about your country that sets it apart from the rest. That can be that we make really good car engines. But if Germany and the US both think they make really good car engines, they'll compete and they'll better that on that front.
But France can still acknowledge that we're not very good at car engines, but we make killer windows to put in your cars, and that's our specialty. So we can have specialized nationalism leading to better cooperation between nation states, just as well as we have more competition. That's what I'm sure I've rounded this off. Yes?
Ignoring the fact that obvious tonight, it's more likely that actually what happens to strong nationalistic countries force weaker ones to be able to basically convert and take their resources away from them.
We acknowledge that there will be self-interest for these nations. We acknowledge that they will try to better their standing. But we think that we've shown quite clearly, also on the point of violence, Daniel made a lot of very clear arguments for why this exploitation is so much less likely to happen nowadays when countries are holding each another in check. When we both have the very different picture of what war is, and we generally have UN interventions whenever this happens. So the self-centeredness of nation states are usually kept in check within their borders as they try to develop themselves. Now, finally, we showed a wonderful thing of how this nationalism actually leads to stronger democracy, and it is crucial for this and strengthens the cohesion, especially for the poorest and most at-risk citizens inside the country. Because when we get this nationalism, we get something irrational that binds us all within the border. And we humans need something irrational to get that. We think that humanitarian aid will always be small because it's problems that are far away from you. But what you can be really concerned about is people from your group being maltreated, people from your group in trouble. We therefore see that what we get from nationalism is the crucial fact that people are willing to compromise, that even though you might not be a student yourself, you know that your country is proud of its wonderful university system, and you want to keep funding that because you want to keep on being proud of the strengths of your nation. This is inherently incredibly important for all democracies and for the betterment of all their citizens' lives. Democracies constitute a vast majority of the world, and when we allow these to be bound together, instead of fracturing in to different enclaves, all supporting more rights for them, we're finding them saying, no, more rights for all of us, let's help all of us, while nation states engage in a largely bilateral and equal footing when they try to gain enough for themselves. We think that the interconnected economy between nation states is enough to let everyone develop themselves and rise to the top, instead of staying stuck in the loop we're currently in. Thank you.
Barack Obama was wrong. There is a black America and there is a white America, and denying that reality means that we are not able to address the systematic injustices which are being carried out by the government in the name of adhering to an ideology and identity of nationalism, which perpetuates and internalizes the struggle of the people within the nation and prevents you from engaging in it in a systematic way. I'm going to do a couple of things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to engage with the sort of sneaky model coming out again from Bonaparte and OG, where they talk about, no, it's just economic nationalism, blah, 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 for systematic economic reasons. Well, that's not true. Firstly, look at this thing like with controlled developments and how that's supposedly so good for these developing nations. First thing to note is that obviously having global competition between global multinational corporations means that they want to compete with each other to provide the best quality of the workplace and education. They want to provide the best wages for the people in question. So obviously having more access to more companies to do that, you don't want to be dominated by one local hegemon, because that's likely to occur when there's no ability for international competition to occur. Second thing to note, like monetary efficiency for utility, and recognize that they never did justify exactly why nationalism and why benefiting your own people is better than benefiting other people. No, thank you. And that's like the inherent crux of their entire case. And very surprised that that didn't show up. But in the absence of that, we present you with a very reasonable metric, which is to say that we want the greatest thing for the, we want the greatest good for the most amount of people. And RM got to this in a report which he spoke about Angola, because the same resources in the Netherlands could be used substantially better to create more well-being, to create more utility in the world, if they're being spent on malaria nets, if they're being spent on feeding starving people. This is due to marginal decrease in utility. No, thank you. If you already have access to basic goods, if you have access to voting rights, if you have access to education, all of these things, your life can only get so much better. But if you don't have access to any of these things, and you're literally starving, then living from one day to the next is going to be the entire difference in whether you live to, like, it changes your entire life. It's not as big a deal for these people. That is to say, utility cannot be measured in national identity. It cannot be measured in these arbitrary distinctions, which are set up only as a result of political and military history, which are entirely meaningless and not just arbitrary, as CG would have you say. Third thing to note, the problem with the commons, no thank you, and why national identity promotes worse outcomes for the world as a whole systematically, because here you can also talk about it's in every single country's national interest to fish as much as possible from like the North Atlantic or something. That means that in the end, you're going to have people, like you're gonna run out of fish, and that's really bad because it means nobody gets fish. The problem here is to say that because people don't cooperate, because they don't set up limits for themselves, where they don't take as much as they would otherwise, where they give something to the other countries, where they cooperate together, they're going to have a better outcome in the future. And you can't swirl that and say that, oh no, but then the nationalistic thing to do is to come together, because then they're literally promoting globalism while they're supporting nationalism. Fuck that. This is seriously about a definitional clash. And I actually want to get to that now, because the definition, like, it's so unreasonable. They found 4 different definitions of nationalism in this debate. To clarify everything, nationalism is when a country chooses to put its own interests before the interests of other countries, and vice versa. That belief that people hold that their national identity is like their most important identity. I think that's a very reasonable definition that most teams in this debate can agree upon. I think that most of the things still stand without being very confusing. That helps you judges. The fourth thing to note here, like last point of refutation on that, is the fact of the matter, when the global poor are able to work together and when they're able to sort of de facto unionize, then they're able to secure more of their rights than if they're just isolated people living in isolated countries. So Angola has to struggle on its own to get that economic independence, and other countries need to struggle on their own to do that, whereas it's probably better, no thank you, if they're able to come together and to demand fair treatment from multinational corporations. So, no thank you. Or actually, yes.
Okay, so of course you can still do that and give a reasonable amount from one country to another without actually saying like, oh, go fuck yourself, you're off welfare now because the money we give to you can be used better elsewhere. But moreover, we have a mechanism how countries can actually develop themselves on the basis of shared interest that they have in a tangible group of people, rather than some vague idea of common humanity that never leads anywhere, and that only leads for people to vote for Raj because at least he provides some semblance of
security. So the main thing to note here is that if it's in everybody's self-interest to cooperate and to trade in this way, then nationalism is entirely unnecessary, because every nation state already operates in its self-interest in the default. So what is the actual comparative in the world that they propose? The difference is that now people have an inherent belief that they should do more for themselves than just for everyone. So they're going beyond that. They're not necessarily agreeing to just the multilateral agreement, which is in accordance with the principles that I described prior. So enough on that. Now I'm going to go through CG's case and why that doesn't necessarily provide a solution to the problem either. Because the first thing to note here is that when they speak about, we can get good things because irrationality means that we have successes. Obviously, the fact that it's irrational means that you got lucky when you got successes. It doesn't mean that it's a result of the fact that you were irrational, that you were able to do good things. We think that the space race money could have been used significantly more efficiently by companies. It's not clear to us why it had to have been an irrational push. The next thing to note is on diversity, and it's not clear to me whether, of course, everybody can still have a national identity without saying that their own national identity is better than others. I think the fact of the matter is the reason that we can have yoga as an example, the fact that we can enjoy food from different countries here is a result of the fact that people are willing to share their national identities with other people. The fact that people are willing to say that maybe food from other countries is as good, if not better than the food that we have, because that is in and of itself a claim against nationalism, because it is the recognition that there are things that are better than that which your own nation can provide. Third thing to note on like democracy, I think that we intrinsically clash against this point, to the point of which you're no longer able to discuss the real issues that matter. Because if you start to criticize the operations of the state, automatically you become excluded from the group as a mechanism of how nationalism serves to exclude, whereas other identities have an incentive to include you much more. And that's really important, because it means that if you're not able, like the most important element of democracy is criticizing the state and highlighting the things which it needs to do better. That's the point of democracy, that we can discuss the wrongdoings of the state and then we can move beyond it. If we're not able to have that, then we lose democratically. So that doesn't work either. So last way up here against opening, and just being very clear against Wayne here in the size of our impacts and what we can actually do. Because we think the most reasonable thing to look at in this debate is identity and how it shapes people. Because we think that incentives and political motives and such tend to direct almost all policies, but even if you assume their things happen, that's worse for the world as a whole due to the mechanisms and examples we provided. But like, let's look at just an individual person. Is nationalism better than the other identities we provided? We've told you that other identities have an incentive to include you, be it because they believe that it's the best objective good to have more people achieve salvation, or whether they believe that they might go into hell otherwise. Regardless of what it is, they have an incentive to include you. They want people to feel included, and they want to have an identity which is best for everyone, due to the fact that utility is the most important thing in this debate. We can give it to the most amount of people that will benefit from it the most severely, and because of the global poor, they suffer the most. I see you smiling. That means that my time is up. Thank you very much.
Just take one of the videos.
Inspect this stuff.